This video today is really a discussion about an individual. His name was George Adamski. In the 1960s, he, amongst other people like Billy Meyer and several others, did some 8mm home movies of some UFOs that they say they filmed. And in my past 20 years of researching UFOs, because I've been interested in this subject, I've come across some rather odd rarity situations where they've shown this same spacecraft in several different things. The most significant is the assumption that the Germans created a type of aircraft during World War II, and that it was seen and identified by several airmen during the war. And there's a video that came out, I was lucky enough to find it, and it does an overview of what the craft looked like, what they did as far as they mounted artillery guns underneath it, and a lot of the things they show kind of leaves me guessing that perhaps what George Adamski filmed was a model of this aircraft that Germany had created during the Second World War. And why did they do it? Because it was a propaganda move on the part of the Nazis. And that after the war was over, you see these films come out and photographs of this thing, and my assumption now has been that these were toy models that the Nazis made for children, and that George Adamski got his hands on one of these, and to kind of like continue the propaganda of what the Nazis were doing during World War II, he filmed it in order to say, this is a real spacecraft. I don't know how he filmed it. Personally, I don't care, but what I have seen is that it was a real aircraft, and that probably after the war ended, the Americans actually acquired it from the Nazis, because a lot of the technology that came about because of like von Braun's U-2, or not U-2, but his V-2 rocket. These kinds of things were actually confiscated by the American government after the end of the war. And I believe that to keep this whole thing hush-hush, the American government never disclosed anything about the fact that the Germans had made this thing. It is an aircraft. It's not a spacecraft. The Germans made it. And in the photos I've seen, there were real good close-ups of the undercarriage of it. It has those three obvious round, what most people think are anti-gravity devices that kind of propelled it up off the ground. And under it you can see an obvious anti-aircraft gun that was mounted underneath it. And the markings on the side of this aircraft were black crosses. And the Germans used those. And the only other photo I've seen of the spacecraft or aircraft on the ground showed, it was real fuzzy. It showed a German military truck sitting next to it. And there were a couple of German airmen climbing on top of it. And from what I saw of these shots, and in several other videos I've seen since about UFOs, they consistently show this thing. There's even a guy somewhere, I don't know where I saw this, he did a recreation of it in metal, and they show him implying various things about it. But the original video that had to do with this being an aircraft, they had diagrams of it inside showing like what the compartments looked like inside of it. And it's like the Germans had found a way to make something that could fly, and it looked so much like an actual flying saucer that it's more than coincidence that George Adamski and other people have since that time come up with these sightings and these films of these things, because either they're continuing what Hitler intended it to be, which is propaganda, fear in the Allies of what the Germans were doing, or that the American government continues to operate these things in secret, and people are seeing them periodically since the end of the war. But my personal assumption is that the United States used the technology that the Germans had created in this aircraft and have advanced their own technology since. So it's not really an extraterrestrial thing. It's not something like an alien has used the world or as a visiting point, and that the United States found these people and then used their technology. It's not extraterrestrial. It's actually the Germans themselves, the Nazis. They created this aircraft to create a sense of fear in the Allies, and then after the war ended and Hitler was dead, you had some sympathizers who probably wanted to continue that propaganda in another way, but indirectly it all goes back to the Nazis. And that's why George Adamski is the primary person to have seen this alien spacecraft and filmed it, because he probably was one of the few people who had one of these actual models that the Germans had made for small children and for, just kind of like, this is something we've made, and here's a little model you can put together and play with or whatever. And somehow it got out of the German Deutschland, and other people in the United States got a hold of these things and they built them. And in the years since, videos have come out everywhere dealing with this one spacecraft. And I personally, I strongly believe now, looking at all of these things, that some were sympathizers, some maybe were just innocent bystanders and found these things and figured, I've never seen this before, so they just decided, let's just wire it up and try and make some photos of it, and maybe we'll be able to convince people this was an alien spacecraft. But what I have seen in some very, very fuzzy type home videos, this one person did it. It was called The Secret Programs of the German Nazis During the End of the World War II. And this one aircraft was overemphasized in it. Everywhere you looked, it was there all the time. But all of this is based on what I have heard and seen myself in videos I've collected. And it's like everywhere you look, it's either George Adamski himself who's talking about this spacecraft or this aircraft, or you might be lucky enough to find this thing where it was about secret aircraft that were developed during the time that the Nazis still were in control in Germany. And obviously it doesn't help the United States government today to say, yeah, that's what it was, because it would make the United States even more implicated as to they obtained it, they're using it today, they don't want people to know that, so they're suppressing it. They're saying, well, it's not aliens, but we can't say what it is. But they have confirmed one or two other times, yeah, these spacecraft exist or these aircraft exist, but we don't know where they're coming from, we don't know what they are. And possibly even Blue Book might have actually found out something during the time they were in the position to investigate these things. But since they're a part of the United States Air Force, the government probably told them, we don't want you talking about that. We want you to suppress it and just totally take it off of the books. And so that's what they did. But it's really, really an interesting subject, to say the least, of what were the Germans really doing at the time that the end of the war was happening, because they knew they were going to lose. So these things could have been made just so the Germans could make the Allies look like idiots, maybe.